Greetings, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Best Practices for Assuring Unified Communications in the Digital Workplace Era, where we'll be discussing how to keep employees everywhere connected by overcoming the top IT operations management issues associated with UC Solutions. My name is Robert Waters. I'm in the marketing department at Optanix, and I'm going to kick things off here today. Before we begin, I just want to cover a few housekeeping items. First off, all attendees are on mute, so you can hear us, but we can't hear you. Because of that, you can submit any questions you may have in the questions box, which is accessible via the question mark icon. We'd love to have this be an interactive session, so we'll do our best to answer your questions as we go along, but we also plan to have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Now, if you think of any questions after the session, or you're looking for anything else really, you can shoot an email to optanix@optanix.com, and we'll be happy to help you out. Now that we've got that out of the way, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenters. As stated previously, my name is Robert Waters. I am the marketing director here at Optanix, and I'm leading things off today. Joining me is Stephen Faust, our Director of Solutions Architecture here at Optanix. Stephen has been with Optanix since about March, I believe, but has about 20 years of prior experience in the technology space, including stints at Cisco, AT&T, Avaya, Windstream, and Tata Communications. And he's not listed here, but I should also mention that Gary Vandenberg is joining us on the line today. Gary is another one of our solution architects, and he's here to help out with any questions that may pop up during this session. And before we get into the meat of the presentation, here's just some quick background on Optanix so you're aware of who we are and what angle we're approaching this topic from. As the slide states, we are both a technology and managed services provider, which effectively means we are a software developer that sells a service assurance platform, and that we also have a 24/7 NOC delivering a managed service. And both of those offerings focus predominantly on the UC contact center and IT infrastructure spaces. And here's just one more slide that speaks to our credentials in this space. I won't do a deep dive on any of the figures here since they're all pretty self-explanatory. The only thing I will point out is the logo on the left-hand side there with the red outline. That logo is for TMC's 2019 Unified Communications Product of the Year Award, which was awarded to our platform, the Optanix platform. And given the fact that today's session is focused on UC, I thought that would be worth pointing out. So moving on to our actual topic for today, what I have here is a quote that's intended to serve as the foundation for our session. And this quote comes from the Gartner report, How to Maximize Unified Communications Adoption Inside the Digital Workplace. And the quote states, unified communications at the highest level attempts to deliver on three core areas of communications technology: messages, meetings, and calls. And I share that quote not because it contains any grand revelations, but really just to ensure that we're all operating from a common vernacular as we get underway here today. So on this slide, you'll see a graph illustrating the changes to the size of the US UC market from 2014 to present, and then projected all the way out to 2025. So as the graph shows, the market has been growing significantly over the past several years and is actually projected to continue on that upward trend for the foreseeable future. There are two things really worth noting here. The first is that this graph shows growth in both the hosted and on-prem UC markets. Obviously, the hosted market is experiencing more rapid growth, but the on-prem market is still increasing at a pretty linear rate. The second thing worth noting is that the figures reported here are actually from May of 2019, which was roughly 9 months before the COVID-19 pandemic started to affect life in the US. And we'll touch on why that's notable on our next slide here. So as I just hinted at on the previous slide, and this should come as no big surprise to anyone, but UC has experienced a major boost as a result of the pandemic, and the market is now experiencing its fastest growth ever. As one might expect, this growth is the direct result of the new work arrangements mandated by many governments and companies to try to curb COVID and protect employees. We now have more people working from home than ever before, and thus more people than ever before are reliant on unified communications to keep them connected to their colleagues, customers, partners, all stakeholders really. And it's fair to say that if the graph on the previous slide were updated with more current figures, we'd likely see a big uptick in the size of the UC market starting in 2020, really probably some hockey stick, if you will, exponential growth. And as you see on the final bullet here, which borrows information from the Gartner report I mentioned a couple slides back, how to maximize UC adoption inside the digital workplace, companies can't just deploy UC solutions and hope for the best. They must ensure those solutions are operating at peak performance to ensure the solutions deliver positive user experiences that drive high levels of user adoption. And if companies fail to assure their UC solutions, they're instead going to see low levels of user adoption and thus a low ROI on their UC investments. And unfortunately, as you'll see on the next slide, sometimes achieving that assurance is easier said than done. So as we sort of level set on earlier, unified communications and collaboration solutions deliver integrated voice, video, mobility, present services, and more really across endpoints, devices, and applications. So as you can imagine, environments comprised of so many varied and distributed technologies are technically complex and thereby difficult to manage. This slide here outlines what we found to be the most prevalent ITOM issues companies encounter around UC based on our years of experience monitoring and managing some of the world's largest UC networks. These issues include things like an inability to easily reverse or isolate unwanted UCM changes, a lack of access to data within call detail records, and an ability to derive real-time and historical perspectives on traffic, usage, and problem areas via call detail and call management records, and complex triage processes resulting in high mean time to resolve. So the reason we're gathered here today is because through Optanix's years of experience operating in the UC space, we've developed solutions that address those issues mentioned on the previous slide, and that enable companies to assure the availability and performance of their UC solutions. And I will now turn it over to Stephen Faust, who will share those solutions with you all. So Stephen, take it away.
Great, thanks Rob. Just to let you know, these following screens are really just meant to give you a taste of what we're capable of delivering in the UC space. You're going to see some dashboards, various visualizations, also some tools on how you can leverage your CDR records to a greater degree. And in general, what we're really trying to convey is that we really bring a full stack of capabilities with our platform. And this, you're just seeing one element of it. We're going to have further webinars that are going to touch on other technologies, but I think in general, you should think of this as just one piece of the puzzle and helping customers in a variety of means to better isolate and troubleshoot, monitor changes, look at trend analysis. There's a lot of ways that we see customers leverage these capabilities. And I'll kind of walk through them, and then we'll answer some questions at the end. So what you're seeing right here is the representation of our tool. It's through a web GUI. Once you log into your particular instance, you'll see this is what we would call the main UC dashboard. And again, a lot of these tools and the visualizations you're going to see represented, they kind of came through a process where we kind of went back and forth with our customers under support and asked them, what do you want to see? Ask our engineers what is most important to you, what is going to help you quickly isolate and solve the problem, what areas do you think need to take precedence. And one thing I can't show you because these are slides is that most of these visualizations are interactions that you can drill through. So you could click on something like here and do an export. You could click one of these sub corners and change the duration that's represented. You could hover over them and data will be displayed as well. So they're very interactive. They're not just meant to be static, and these are tracking things in real time. So I'll kind of just walk through various components. This is actually your cluster. In this particular instance, you have a publisher, 2 subscribers, and it's kind of showing you how the communication path between them is, functioning. If any of these links were to go down, you'd obviously see a change to that visualization. And the lower quadrant of this, you'll kind of see that it's showing you registered devices with a key. So each color represents the different elements of the UC cluster that they're registered to. So this one's in blue are registered to subscriber 1. Anything in green is kind of the secondary subscriber. So, and this is the total quantity over time. So if you saw a big event where, a bunch of devices unregistered at an interval, that could be indicative of a particular problem. Or you could see, was it cross cluster or not? Up here, we're kind of taking a look at SDLQ activity, because obviously looking at how the database is performing and what's going on with it, is also a key component of what's driving the underlying technology inside your UC cluster. There's also sub-tabs here. You could look at the CPU and memory. But a lot of these visualizations aren't what I'd call standard server. They're very customized to the UC environment for Cisco. We leverage the full API suite that Cisco makes available. We leverage their Axle interface as well. And we work very closely with their technology with each release to make sure that we're really trying to give you a distinct advantage in terms of how you're able to observe, monitor, triage, and understand that environment. So as I walk through, again, we're not going to go through every one of these, but basically think of someone clicking on a different sub process on the frames that are on the left here. One of the things that this is showing right now is I've isolated it to, let's say, the publisher. It's bringing back every process running on that. These tables, kind of represent memory utilization, things like that. They can be sorted as well. So this one, you could sort it by which process is using the most memory. Then you could select it. Like in this particular example, it selected Tomcat 1. And then once the process is selected, you can kind of get a sense of what's going on with that particular process. How much CPU is it using? How much memory? What's the thread count? But really, what I think is beneficial that you'll see is that, especially the larger your cluster is and the more complex it is, you could easily go through, over 100 servers and immediately isolate one, isolate a process, and look at how it's performing, as opposed to before, if let's say you had to log into a bunch of VM environments or RDP into a bunch of servers in your environment and try to gather stats through various, Windows monitoring processes or things like that. It's really trying to create a single pane of glass that represents what's happening to your environment, any anomalies, anything out of place, and then letting you understand that. And a lot of times you'll see with some of these statistics, it'll not just give you what's happening in real time, but it'll give you what's happened over the last 5 minutes, as an example. So moving forward, these next 5 or so slides will go into what we do with CDR, which I also think is one of the ways we can differentiate in this space. CDR records, and just to kind of give you a little bit of a backstory, we've seen a lot of customers that understand that their CDR records contain a lot of value, but the usability of these records has proven extremely difficult, especially as their environment scales up. And there's more and more records, and being able to intelligently search and access this data and analyze it and use that analysis to either triage a process or to determine, let's say the scope of new equipment they need to order, or how maybe some other thing that's happening in their environment is impacting the UC space, is proven very difficult. So what we've really tried to do is take this data and splice it up a bunch of different ways, represent it in various degrees, and let you easily search it and find answers you're looking for. I think, and we've had customers where they've never had combined CDR records before. So that instantly, just the fact that they had these disparate UC clusters that had information, but they never were able to look at it in the aggregate. They always had to look at it in these distinct clusters and then try to piece that data together. That's another big value that we've been able to deliver, is letting them do in-depth analysis against their entire UC space. So I'll walk through some of these UC CDR dashboards. This one is really just trying to represent all the QoS components, MOS score, packet loss, latency, jitter. And this particular interval, it's doing it over the past 30 days. But again, you can see here, you could click here on 1 month and change that to a day or something else. This next one is also very popular because, as we pointed out in some of the previous slides, a big piece of the UCs is understanding what's going on just in general. Someone calls in and says, hey, I experienced poor call quality, but sometimes those problems can be pretty elusive to try to track down, isolate, troubleshoot, because you don't know, was it on the far end caller having the problem? Was it your system? And then if it was your system, what could it be attributed to? So this lets you look at the last 24 hours, basically your top offenders. We call it poor calls. And it says, you know, who was calling who, from what device, you know, what number, what extension, how much latency, jitter, packet loss was there. And then we've even got some color code indicators showing you, like this particular one had a latency that was kind of moderate, but a lot of jitter. These two had really bad packet loss. So what will happen is someone will call in and report a call quality problem. Someone will jump on this dashboard and instantly isolate it to this particular call. And they could say, yep, this call, I saw a lot of packet loss, and then they can drill into more detail. With the cause codes, again, this is even just showing you a subset of all the cause codes out there, but let's say there's a particular cause code that you care about. You can deselect everything and just select that one, then you can scan it for days on end to find out, okay, when is it hitting, or how often am I seeing this particular cause code that I care about occur. This next one is kind of showing you how within the tool, you can really set up some advanced CDR queries. This is a drop-down kind of showing you the options that it presents to you, where you can do originating number, device IP address, and again, this could be an equal, or it can be a contain, or a greater than. So you can set all kinds of things. You could say, look, I know the subnet IP address range of these devices that I'm trying to pull the CDR records for, and then I could also add another rule. So you can actually layer these rules. It's not like all or nothing. And then once you create this advanced rule, you know, and you set the time and date parameters as well, you could even specify, is it your entire environment or just a subset? And then you save that rule. Then next time, all you have to do is click it and say, submit query. And it's basically going to run that particular set of rules. In this example, maybe it was a filter you set for 911 calls. You want to see any calls made to 911. And then it'll kind of, once you submit your query, it's going to bring back all the results that fit the parameters of that query. And this particular one, it might be, you know, originating called parties that had a 2, right? Something that simple, or a called number that had a certain number, certain prefix of digits. And then you could even see, okay, how frequently did these calls occur? Like, was there a certain time where a lot of these calls were happening? There were 43 total records for this time frame specified, and then you could even drill in further and get what we refer to as engineering level detail. So, and this even scrolls down even more, kind of giving you everything from, okay, what was the originating name, IP address, media transport port, was there any IPv6, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, it lets you instantly have an indexed, easily referenceable, how should I say, view into your CDR records. And we actually aren't querying your CDR that exists within your UC cluster directly. We make a copy of it, and the purpose of that is so that it's not really performing these queries. The more advanced, obviously, you could see the more load it would put on the database. But this way, since we have a copy, we're not impacting anything to do with your production. So that's kind of another way that we can really optimize the way in which, you know, we kind of add this value for these advanced CDR analysis. Another thing that was pointed out early on was the need to isolate maybe admin changes that were unwanted, or maybe that created less than desirable effect. And that's kind of what this dashboard is intended to do, where you can look at the config differentiation from a certain period of time to a certain period of time. You could see who made the change, what devices were changed, was it something that was added, modified, so it even characterizes the changes. and then you can see, okay, is this something I need to revert? Or at least maybe I know now, okay, this exact change occurred at the exact moment that we saw a problem in the environment, or that the problem was reported within maybe 10 minutes or something like that. So that way you're not having to guess, okay, was there a config change that led to this problem that's being reported? You can easily kind of get a sense for that here. And then in general, maybe you're not having any problems reported, but you just want to get a sense of what changes are being made at what intervals of time, who's making them, and then just try to understand, okay, were these changes that were approved, like did it follow the proper change request procedure, et cetera, et cetera. So that's some of the functions of that particular screen. And the last one we'll kind of close off here, and I'm just trying to give you a perspective that it's not just entirely the Cisco UC stack. We also look at Cisco Emergency Responder. We could look at critical processes. You can drill into them, understanding how they're performing from memory, CPU, different things to do with this analysis. We could even, if we wanted to drill into Unity, look at locked ports, look at your port utilization. We could perform, any type of trending forecast, saying, hey, look, based on this, you might run out of Unity ports, in the next couple months. But I mean, that's kind of just a general overview of the tool. So do we want to go ahead and the last 5 minutes or so switch into Q&A here, Rob?
You bet.
Oh, hold on. I don't want to skip this last piece. Then we'll do Q&A. So again, just to characterize, we don't ever want anyone to attend one of these webinars and kind of put Optanix in a particular box, because you might know about us in this one quadrant, but you might not understand how much we play in the other spaces. So I think the most traditional version of Optanix is an on-premise deployment where we either help you directly as a customer or through a partner providing, possibly remote managed services or being used as a tool. But we also, have experience in hosted deployments where either we're being hosted or the partner is part of a hybrid solution where some of their stuff is on-prem, some of their stuff is in either their cloud or someone else's cloud. And also for the partner community, we've been doing a lot with various flavors of managed platform and managed service. And some of the advantages of that are things like multi-tenant, where in essence, we're able to let the partners create a deployment of Optanix that they can then, sell out as a service that, is a great platform that's already spun up. It's ready to go. You can add customers to it. They can instantly start seeing the benefit, and you're not having to create these siloed environments for every single one of your clients. You can instantly kind of just add on to that existing infrastructure, and it really helps expedite things like ITSM or any type of custom dashboards you're creating, because then everyone can benefit from it that's under your roof. And then other things we're doing with the way we're setting up the managed service deployments and how that's benefiting different platforms. Okay, now we're in Q&A.
Now we're ready. Okay, let me take a look and see what's come in here. Excuse me. All right, so first question off the bat. If a customer is interested in UC monitoring or support, what other components are required to obtain the solution?
So good question. In essence, our standard deployment is either physical or virtual hardware that we normally place as close to that UC source as possible to kind of optimize its efficiency. But we do not force anyone to, take on monitoring elements or, purchase software for elements of their environment that they're not going to utilize. So we can definitely tailor the solution for your UC piece. The ideal scenario is where we can look at every leg of the call path, which would include certain things like gateways and network elements, but it never has to be anything more than a subset of your environment. And we can kind of also relay to you best practices, but again, we can be as large or as big a footprint in terms of how the design is set up, and we do it based on device counts. Is kind of our standard licensing practice, but it's pretty versatile. And we, again, that would be something we'd work with you. Part of my role in design architecture is understanding those dynamics.
Perfect. Okay, we've got another one here. Is it an Optanix appliance for monitoring and management of the UC setup, or is it a third-party appliance integrated with Optanix tools?
So it's 100% ours. And another thing to point out is we don't use agents, so you don't have to go and install anything on these various elements under our management. We basically just probe them for, SMP, syslog, various API interfaces as well. But it's 100% ours. And again, we benefit from the fact that we not only build the tool, but we use it internally. And it's one of those things we kind of pride ourselves on kind of, that's where we can say we've experienced it from every aspect, because again, it's not just a software we develop, it's actually a tool in-house we use for our managed services as well.
Perfect. All right. We've got a couple more here and we got a couple of minutes, so we'll try to get through them. How do you handle MACD work?
Good question. MACD, we typically operate on the philosophy that there's a bucket of hours that we can set up. And again, it depends on the level of complexity. We normally fall into either simple or complex, but traditionally the MACD, we kind of, as part of the project deployment, set you up with a bucket of hours. But we define MACDs traditionally anything under 4 hours. Larger than that, it falls into like more of a project scope. But I guess the good news is that we do perform them. We can be part of your standard change control procedure. We can make changes at certain intervals of the day. After hours, we can follow scripts. I mean, that's definitely part of what we do, is not just, facilitate the triage. We can perform that MACD work. And in certain instances, we can even have, personnel that are, that we basically dedicate to those tasks. And again, it really depends on volume and what you're looking for. And then, what type of MACD services, you see yourself needing on an ongoing basis, but that's another thing we can scope out. We definitely have capabilities to handle that, track that. We even have our own internal ticketing platform built into the product that can manage those updates, make you aware of how the MACDs are being executed, through ITSM integration back to your ServiceNow or whatever ticketing system you happen to have.
Perfect, great answer. All right, looks like the last question we have at the moment, unless we get some more in, is how do you maintain security to your platform?
So we, have a SIML product that we will talk about more in future sessions. But one of the ways is that our devices go on site, they phone home, meaning they're pre-configured, they're ready to go, and they try to really focus on northbound only traffic, and it's in the customer's environment. So again, we try to make it where they're as secure as possible, because we are trying to send data out from their environment versus us going into their environment and trying to extract data, is the general concept. And we also have an interface, like I said, we built called SIML, which does a lot of things, but it basically adds an extra layer of obfuscation between us and the customer that, is definitely an improved level of technology over standard VPN. And within SIML, we can create a lot of barriers to unauthorized access. We can track things extremely well. And we can also, kind of add a lot of versatility over not putting a ton of the onus of security configuration on the customer's IT admins. The way we do it through SIML is we can create profiles and then still maintain levels of detail that they can access for security audit purposes.
Perfect. All right, well, that was our final question, and we are just 1 minute over, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. So thank you, Stephen, for your presentation, and thanks to everyone who joined us. Have a good day.
Great. Yeah, thanks, everyone. Have a great day.